Trish Steiner, Chair of the Community Awareness Committee. We are a committee of the Neighborhood Safety Commission. The Neighborhood Safety Commission is comprised of 15 individuals appointed by the chairman and the district commissioners. It is the policy of the Community Awareness Committee not to discuss any particular individuals, incidents, or past or present cases. We welcome and thank you for attending this evening, and welcome those of you who are watching on Cobb TV. We have file cards available for written questions. Please raise your hand and we will collect the cards throughout the evening's discussion. Please turn your cell phone off or on silent, as this will interfere with our live broadcasting. Our moderator this evening is Joel Cobb. Joel is an attorney whose practice is trial litigation. He has been a practicing attorney for 20 years. He currently serves on the Neighborhood Safety Commission and was elected to serve as secretary in March. He serves as the president of the Mableton Improvement Coalition and president of the Mableton Community Fund. He has also served as the secretary and president of his HOA. Our moderator, we appreciate Joe being our moderator this evening, and Joe will now introduce our distinguished panel members to you. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Again, my name is Joel Cope, and I'll be the moderator of this evening's discussion. Our panel topic will be concerning mental health, and I think we have a really great evening planned ahead with some very talented panelists amongst us. As was explained earlier, this is a panel discussion in which we freely urge all the panelists to speak as much as possible about the topics that they bring expertise to this evening. We have members in the audience who are here with us. We also have audience members who are watching us either through Cobb TV or through the internet, and they can live stream this particular program. And we certainly welcome anyone to suggest any questions that they may hear, as the panelists will sometimes have a comment or provide some information that may provoke a question on their end, and that's what we hope that will happen. We're very lucky to have with us some very talented individuals, and I would mention in no particular order, Lieutenant Becky Westenberger with the Cobb County Sheriff's Department is one of our panelists this evening. Tommy Thompson is another one of our panelists this evening. Colonel Janet Prince of the Cobb County Sheriff's Department is with us this evening. We have also John Percy, who's Assistant District Attorney and with the Accountability Court. And last, but by no means least, Chief Deputy Milton Beck is with us this evening for the Cobb County Sheriff's Office. What I'd like for us to do this evening is if each one of the panelists could just give a brief explanation of who he or she is and then a little bit of experience about what they do. And then we'll begin with the question and answer period so that you can all provide information for our audience this evening. So, Lieutenant Westenberger, if you'd begin us off, introduce yourself to the audience, and then we can kind of go across the dais.
Thank you. I'm Becky Westenberger with Cobb County Sheriff's Office. I'm a lieutenant assigned to the training unit, oversee the training unit for the Sheriff's Office, as well as an adjunct instructor at North Central Georgia Law Enforcement Academy. As of May 8th, I've been there 20 years with the agency, and as far as my role with CIT, I'm the law enforcement coordinator representing the Sheriff's Office, teaching crisis intervention training.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. Ms. Thompson?
Yes, I'm with the National Alliance on Mental Illness. I'm with the NAMI Northside Atlanta affiliate. We have Georgia affiliates all across the state. I am a board member for NAMI Northside Atlanta, and also a facilitator for our family support groups. We have regular family support groups as well as peer support groups. I also work with advocacy to help people be able to clearly tell their stories to legislators so that we can do advocacy work. And also the thing that brought me to NAMI is my 24-year-old son who has schizophrenia and who is in prison in the state of Georgia.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Colonel?
I'm Colonel Janet Prince. I've been with the Sheriff's Office for about 27 years. I serve currently as the jail commander, overseeing all operations in detention division. We oversee an inmate population in excess of 2,000. And as far as the mental health portion of it, we do provide mental health services within the jail. So I oversee that process as well.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. Mm-hmm. Mr. Persley?
Hi, my name is John Persley. I'm with the District Attorney's Office here in Cobb County. I'm currently the Accountability Court prosecutor, which means that I prosecute exclusively in the Drug Treatment Court, the Mental Health Court, and the Veterans Accountability and Treatment Court. I've been in and around the criminal justice system since 1994 when I started practicing law. I've been a prosecutor for about 16 years of that time, and I was a defense attorney for about 5 or 6 years too.
Great, thank you. Hey, Chief Deputy?
Good evening, Joel, Trish, thank you for having us. My name is Milton Beck. I'm the Chief Deputy Sheriff in the Cobb County Sheriff's Office, and I oversee the day-to-day operations of 822 employees. Inmate population, as Colonel Prince said, of approximately 2,000 to 2,100 individuals in our custody at any given time. The Sheriff's Office is also involved with John and Superior Court, and State Court, with some of the accountability courts. We work hand in hand. Sheriff Warren is a strong supporter of working hand in hand with the judicial system with some of these accountability courts.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. Just to help us kind of get on a good start this evening and to explain for our audience some of these terms, what is meant by the term peer or consumer?
I'll start with that. As opposed to being a family member, it's the person who actually has a mental illness diagnosis. And so I think peer comes from because they join together with others with mental illness to be able to understand their own illnesses better.
And is one term more accepted than the other?
I like peer much better than consumer, and I think they probably do too. They see themselves as peers.
Okay. All right. Any other panelists want to add to that?
Would you say that's more of a treatment term?
I only know it from the NAMI
Okay.
support groups, and so these are peers supporting their peers
Okay.
in their own journey of recovery.
Okay. And what is a kind of a common sense lay definition of mental illness or a mental health condition?
Yeah, I'll take that one again.
All right.
That a mental health condition, if you look across the broad spectrum, about 20% of the population will at some point in their life have some mental diagnosis, mental illness diagnosis. It can range from mild depression all the way to schizoaffective disorder, bipolar, with very strong hallucinations and voices. So it's on a broad spectrum. We typically in our NAMI support group see families who have loved ones with schizophrenia, with bipolar disorder, with serious suicidal tendencies, depression. Am I missing one? I think that's about it. It's PTSD, I'm sorry, and ADHD as well. I should know those because I have family members with those as well.
Okay. And Colonel or Chief Deputy, do you have a different working definition that you use for your purposes within the Sheriff's Office?
I can tell you this, we're not experts in the mental health industry, but as far as law enforcement, we have seen an increase of mental health illness coming into our facility. I believe out of the 2,100 individuals we have in custody today, approximately 30% of them are on some type of psychiatric medication. We work hand in hand with the CSB, Community Service Board, Cobb Douglas Community Service Board. I think we have 11 staff members, including a psychiatrist. So what I'm getting to is that law enforcement has learned over the years, basically the hard way of having to deal with this issue. And we're dealing with it on a day-to-day basis inside our facility and outside our facility, and NAMI and groups and accountability courts such as that. As far as the state of Georgia is educating us, and we're receiving more training on mental health illness as far as how to deal with it. So that's our role when we deal with mental health. I couldn't give you my definition of actually mental health illness, but we're seeing a population coming into our facility that's needing treatment and possibly not a jail time.
Okay. All right. I don't know if you had anything else you want to add, Colonel?
Just that in working closely with the mental health staff at our facility, we've come to have a working knowledge of those terms. Unfortunately, we deal with, just like the chief said, with inmates with some type of mental disorder. As a great percentage of our population is under the care of our mental health staff. So we're very fortunate to have them working inside the jail to assist us to manage those that suffer from such diseases.
And Joel, let me make sure the viewers at home and in the audience, the Cobb County Adult Detention Center, where the sheriff is mandated to house these individuals. It's a jail, not a prison. It's a temporary holding facility. Misdemeanors, I believe, is about 6 days of stay, and felonies around 60 days. So it's not a correctional facility. It's not a prison. It's a temporary holding facility. So when mental health individuals that need that need attention coming in, our mental health group stabilizes. Doesn't really treat the problem, it tries to stabilize the issue.
Okay. And just to make it clear, so with jail, the particular individual is only there for a specific fixed period of time, and it's only after sentencing or conviction that they go on to prison per se.
Correct. We're a pretrial facility. Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Now, is mental illness a physiological condition in the same way like diabetes or cancer or heart conditions might be?
It's a combination. It's not a, as some people say, it's not a casserole disease where people come and say, "Oh, we're so sorry to hear about your cancer," or a terminal illness. But it is a very much a disease like any other physical disease. It's very debilitating.
And what does the term CIT stand for?
It stands for Crisis Intervention Training.
Okay. And is this a program that is unique to Georgia?
It actually started in 1987 in Memphis, Tennessee, which is basically they initiated it. The quick story behind it, the Memphis police officers shot and killed an individual who later they found out was mentally ill. And through that, the police department took it upon themselves to start educating and learning more about it. How can we de-escalate issues, or how can we teach our officers dealing with individuals who have a mental illness? And through that, and seeing some of the benefits come through that training, because of the next encounter that the officers dealt with an individual who was mentally ill, he was not injured, and no officers were injured. The individual was not injured, and so it proved to be a good training tool. Is it 100% each and every time? It is not. But it does educate the law enforcement officers when they deal with an individual, consumers who are mentally ill. And so we're, like Chief Beck said, the bottom answer is hopefully not to always have the mindset, well, I've got to take them to jail, and that's not always the answer. And so, but it is a good training tool. It started in Memphis, and it has quickly spread throughout the United States.
And it's my understanding that NAMI played an instrumental role in bringing it to Georgia.
They do play a significant role in bringing it to Georgia. And, the old saying, it takes a village, and in this particular case, it does. It takes the resources out there in the community. It does take the community. It takes the consumer, the families, the doctors, the courts, the law enforcement, and it takes all of these resources really coming together and bridging that gap and working together, and to face this unfortunate disease.
Now, you mentioned courts, and of course, Mr. Percy's here with the accountability courts. Now, some people might be watching this and going, well, gosh, aren't all courts about accountability? What's different about these kinds of courts?
I said earlier I started my career as a traditional prosecutor. All prosecutors are charged with doing justice. The canons say we're supposed to be ministers of justice. Those are the words that are used. But usually when you think about justice, you think about the sword of justice more than anything. But accountability courts are more about making sure that people are held accountable for their actions, but also getting them the treatment that they need, whether that's for a drug problem, a mental health issue, or in our Veterans Accountability and Treatment Court, we have people who have served our country who very often have a dual diagnosis, and by that I mean substance abuse and a mental health diagnosis of some sort.
Okay. Now, if you have a coworker who sits in the office next to you or in the cubicle next to you, and they have major depression, are they also deemed to have a mental illness?
I would say that we are looking at 20% of our population with mental illness, and it's not for us to diagnose that, but they can be working and very productive, receiving appropriate medication and therapy. Not all mental illnesses require heavy medication. Sometimes just with the right amount of medication and a lot of therapy, people can be very productive in the workforce.
And so did I hear you correctly? It's 20% is the statistic?
That's about that's what I've heard. 1 out of every 5 people will experience some form of mental illness in their lifetime. Maybe not 20% at all time, but someone will experience depression or a stress-related trauma syndrome. 20% is
Wow.
Yeah.
That's like 1/5 of our panel here.
Yes.
Wow.
Look
No.
left, look
Not that I'm
right.
implying anything. Now, Ms. Thompson, I guess, do you frequently share with people that you know, either at work or friends or family, that you have a loved one with a mental illness, and why or why not?
I do with my church, with my friends, with my family. I don't discuss it at work. Most of the people that I work with don't have any idea that I have a son with mental illness, but everyone that I went to church with who knew my son, all of my neighbors, all of my friends, it was a very high-profile case, and so it was not anything we were going to hide. And I'm very thankful that we were very honest up front with our friends and family and let them know what was going on, because we've gotten a lot of support because we were willing to do that.
Now, do people who have mental health issues, do they have stigmas that they have to endure?
Yes, yes, yes.
And what are those stigmas from? And any of the panelists can jump in and speak to those, but
You know, I think people feel like they're not going to be productive workers, that they won't be good students, that they won't be reliable, that they might be violent. You know, there are a lot of things that people assume about someone with mental illness, and that's just can't be placed. You can't take all of those things and assume that everyone who experiences some form of mental illness is going to have those issues. And it can be very manageable with medication. You know, speaking from experience, I've seen my son, who was very psychotic without medication, doing extremely well now with medication. And he's working, doesn't work full time, but he has a work duty, and he's seen a road to recovery.
okay, all right, okay. And what are some of the ways that each of you in your own careers, your professions, that you help to kind of deal with or rebut those stigmas?
I think for me personally, it has affected me. Back in 2013, I was maliciously hit by an individual at the jail, and hit by a vehicle. And she, at trial, it come out that the individual that hit me had a mental illness. That she was suffering from bipolar. And so with that being said, it's kind of taken effect on me, because naturally it has affected me personally. And I look at it as, you know, the stigma is people, she talked about it, it's not the casserole disease that everybody runs to and says, hey, let me help you out. Whereas they may address it and see that with cancer or diabetes or leukemia, something of that nature. And people seem to run from it because they feel like mental illness is something that could be contagious, and they don't want to allow their kids to maybe be around that individual's kids because it could be contagious. Or what if we're out in public and they have an episode and they just go crazy, and you know, it's going to make me look bad. Why am I associating myself with them? So instead of reaching out and trying to help that individual, being supportive and letting them know, you know, yes, we understand it is an illness in and of itself, an ugly illness in and of itself, but indeed it's an illness. And just like alcoholism. And so I think personally, it's opened my eyes, and it's taken me almost 4 years to realize, you know, number one, I've forgiven this individual. Number two, you know, I can take my story and share it with other individuals, and you know, and just share what I've happened to me, and what I've learned through all this in dealing with an individual who had mental illness.
Okay. All right.
Mental illness is also not a one-size-fits-all kind of
Correct.
thing. We talk about it as if it's this thing called mental illness, but it runs from mild to extraordinarily severe, and it runs from, and they're just different types and severities, and so it's that I think that plays into the stigma of it as well, to get to your question, because some people who they could with the proper medication, the proper therapy would be fine. Others may not be, and so that stigma just can really the generality of just calling it mental illness can cause those stigmas as well.
Okay. Anyone else want to?
I think from a professional standpoint, One of the things that we did with Lieutenant Westenberger training our staff who is not aware of what mental illness truly is. And it kind of hit home when her accident happened because here we're having to provide custody over a person that injured our coworker. But going through that training, they understood the whys and the hows and that type of thing, and it helped them manage not just that particular inmate, but all inmates a lot better than they ever have.
Okay.
If I may.
Sure.
Also, I'm sorry, on the question of stigma, part of what we do in mental health court is help people with their education, help them with jobs, help them with housing. And so we're constantly coming up against that wall of employers concerned about wanting to hire people. You know, people can't get through high school because they've had issues with their mental illness. And so we're constantly trying to help people get jobs, help them to get housing, help them to get an education, because if we can get them stabilized into those kind of things and get their life back on track, it can really help with a lot of those stigmas. Because when people see these people succeeding, and that's one of the things that CIT has been able to do, and we've been able to do in mental health court and veterans court. It makes a huge difference in what people think about mental illness and those that are afflicted with mental illness.
Sure. Okay. Now I know that there obviously have been, over the last few years, a number of high-profile stories involving persons that had the episodes of mental illness, but also having some violence associated with those instances. And I know in conversations people often have is kind of they have a mixed feeling. On the one hand, mental illness is coming to the public discussion and people are becoming aware of it, but unfortunately it's in a very negative way, which kind of implies that if you have a mental illness, ergo, you're automatically violent. How can people in your respective professions help kind of rebut or address those particular concerns?
I really feel like getting out there and attending some classes. NAMI, they have a significant amount of classes that is offered and are willing to educate people, and that really is what it takes, is someone being educated. I mean, it's just simple information that people can find out if they can't attend classes, looking information up on the computer just to find out the signs and symptoms. What are the signs and symptoms of someone who has schizophrenia? What are the signs and symptoms of hallucinations? And just kind of realizing and opening their eyes, if I come across an individual in the middle of an episode or, in the middle of a crisis, then it will educate them to be able to recognize it and say, hey, let me try to help you. Or if it's a family member or a friend or coworker, okay, they're in the middle of a crisis. Let me see what I can do, or let's try to get you to a hospital or something to provide some sort of resources. And we're very fortunate in Cobb County that Cobb County has a lot of resources to offer, and NAMI being the backbone and the primary resource. It's phenomenal.
As a family member, I took the 12-week training when I didn't even know how to spell schizophrenia. I had no clue. And as I learned, schizophrenia typically doesn't appear until someone's between the ages of 18 and 25. And I always thought if you had a mental illness, you were born with it. I didn't know it could, come at some later point. And so I learned a lot through that training class. It met for a couple of hours each week for 12 weeks, and we learned about everything. It's a phenomenal program. The teachers that run the classes are very good facilitators, and they have a great curriculum.
Okay. And what role, if any, do you think is played by people's use of terms that we hear in common parlance? Like they might say somebody's wacko, or you hear these different kind of pejorative terms. Do you think that that's much ado about nothing, or do you think that has a significant impact on the way people perceive mental illness?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think it is just the slang that people, because they don't know. When I first started doing the CIT classes and attended it myself, and as well as the trainer to be able to teach it, we look at individuals and we refer to them in different slang, crazy, or a particular code if you work for a law enforcement agency, and a lot more negative slang that they would call an individual. And when I heard the word consumer, and it really kind of I really pushed that and educating people to refer to these individuals as consumers, because what does a consumer do? They receive a product, they receive some sort of means or resource, and that's what people who are diagnosed as mentally ill have, that illness, and that's what they're doing, is they're being a consumer and they're receiving the resources to help them, to get them back on track, whether it's through court or whether it's through the organizations of NAMI and the Zone and the Circle that's out there, and to get them back on track. So they are consumers. So it is. I think it's a little bit of people that just don't know, and that's just what they've heard and that's what they know, and or some that just there's nothing to it. But I really feel like it's a little bit of both.
And Colonel or Chief Deputy, I mean, how about you? Since you obviously work with inmates who have a mental health condition, what kind of verbiage do you use in talking to them and referring to them and dealing with them in a real world jail setting?
I think with the training that we have received, our staff knows what is appropriate to say. I think a lot of what you hear when they refer to those terms in a negative way is more generational, where back then they really didn't understand mental health as a whole. We've come a long way since then, so I don't really hear those terms any longer.
I think the key words are education. We're hearing training and awareness, not only for the public, for law enforcement in general. Being more educated. The CIT class is when people talk about it's a 40-hour course and a very in-depth course that Lieutenant Westenberger teaches. So I think with CIT, some de-escalation mandatory by the state for officers to take de-escalation community policing is making law enforcement more aware of an illness that we did not have that information years ago. So understanding it, being educated, and training it is going to make law enforcement better prepared to handle it.
Okay. And I guess that's a great segue. Does every county in Georgia have a CIT trained officer?
No, sir. They're working on it, slowly getting there. But it's increased number in Cobb County. The city municipalities are really pushing it. Smyrna, Marietta, Kennesaw, sending a lot of their officers through Cobb PD, and of course the sheriff's office, and getting our officers, deputies trained in Cobb. We're seeing a lot more influx of people attending the training from DeKalb County, Brookhaven, Sandy Springs. We're actually having Cobb Fire attend classes, as well as Cobb 911, because your 911 operators a lot of the times are receiving that first initial call when somebody's in the middle of a crisis and a family member who doesn't quite understand what's going on yet, or a neighbor, whatever the incident may be. So we're educating the 911 operators as well. They can be the first bridge there, the first line to start helping and de-escalating with that individual. But we've been fortunate enough that Georgia State Patrol is putting their troopers through the school, making sure that they're 100% compliant. Smyrna, again, a lot of the cities in Cobb County, and are really trying to get their officers trained, but slowly getting there through the state of Georgia. In some of your rural counties, not as fast, but they're getting there. And I think, as Chief Beck was talking about, through post-mandating this statewide, it's actually going to make it a little bit simpler in getting the education out there to the smaller counties that don't necessarily have that individual there readily available to teach the class. So it's going to help significantly.
And how
Joel,
many,
let me just expand on what Lieutenant Westenberger just said about the training. It's not just the sheriff's office training.
No.
Our regional academy serves a region, surrounding counties, 6 municipalities, Cobb Police. We all share this training, so it's not something that we just hold to our employees. We share this with the cities, Bartow, Paulding, a region. So that training is, I just want to make sure that the viewers at home and the audience understand this training is not just specific for sheriff's deputies, but it's for police officers also.
Okay. And how many deputies or employees of the sheriff's department are there that would be potentially eligible to take the CIT class?
Well, all of the sworn and civilian are eligible to take it. It's just a matter of being able to staff their locations while they're away, because it is a 40-hour class. And with the class that's being held at the academy, NAMI really puts the class on, and we just kind of help help guide the way through the class. And we're only limited, unfortunately, we're only limited to have a total of 25 students in the class. And so it kind of presents an issue at that point because you're limited. But we put a class on and really get it going, and it fills up relatively fast. And so the classes are now not only being offered at North Central Georgia Law Enforcement Academy, but as a offsite through the city of Marietta, through Smyrna, and so forth. So it's kind of having that accessibility to expand out. So it makes it much easier.
And where is the North Georgia facility? What town is that in?
North Central Georgia Law Enforcement Academy?
Yes.
It is actually on Austell Powder Springs Road in the city of Austell.
Okay.
Used to be the old Thread Mill Mall.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Great. We actually have been joined by Lieutenant Nathan McCreary with the Cobb County Police Department. For our listeners and viewers, I don't want them to think that somehow G.W. Beck magically transformed his physical
That's
appearance. I'm sure he can do a lot of things, but I don't think he can quite change his physical appearance that dramatically. But we appreciate you joining us,
Thank you
Lieutenant.
for having me. I appreciate it.
Certainly. This is actually a great time for you to kind of jump in. We're actually discussing the CIT, and it's
Great.
our understanding that you recently yourself went through the CIT course.
I did. I went through Lieutenant Westenberger's class at North Central Georgia Training Academy, the full CIT, the full 40 hours. I'm also a crisis negotiator with Cobb County Police. So a lot of the training that is in CIT overlaps what crisis negotiators go through in their basic 40-hour training. And I found it useful, and I think I contacted her about a week after the class and said, we just implemented using the tactics we learned in CIT and avoided a use of force incident with someone who was in a state of a mental crisis. So it works, and it's something that police departments are taking very seriously if you look around the country, and we're taking it very seriously in Cobb County as well, the Sheriff's Department and the Police Department.
Well, and let me kind of unpack some of what you had just said. You did take it last year or this year?
That was 2 years ago.
2 years ago, so in 2015?
2015, yes.
Okay. And when you were first approached about taking the CIT class, did you have any apprehensions or concerns about going through this class?
Not really, because I was a negotiator. It falls right into what I do, and I'm just someone who enjoys learning and any type of additional training to assist us in negotiating, which is an extremely important aspect of critical incidents, especially the management of those. I was absolutely willing to go to the class. I had heard there's a lot of apprehension on the part of officers, the touchy-feely aspects of the CIT program. When you go through the basic mandate academy, everything is control. You're the authority, control. A CIT is more of a let's step back, take a deep breath, give some space to somebody, and it goes opposite of what you're constantly taught. Because I had been through the negotiator course, I understood why they do that. So I didn't have any apprehension, but I do know other officers do.
Okay. And you said there has been a situation where since you've taken the class,
Yeah.
you've actually had at least one, I guess maybe more, instance where
had
this actually
multiple.
came in
Sure.
in a very practical way for you.
Sure. The incident in question was an officer contacted me. We had a large individual, 6'3", 280 plus pounds, who was belligerent and very hostile and aggressive towards his family. The officer called me and said, I think we're about to use a taser on this guy. You need to be en route up here. I was a sergeant at the time. And I said, well, what are you doing? He says, well, he's in the yard and he wants to walk up and down the street. And I said, well, let him walk up and down the street. And that was so different than what police officers are generally taught. It's contain that threat right there. Well, he wasn't really a threat to anybody but himself. The family had dealt with it in the past, so they knew they were a negative trigger to him at this point. And the officers gave him space. By the time I got out to the scene, the officer had called me and said that they allowed the individual to pace up and down the street. He actually walked to a corner store, bought some gummy bears, and that was a positive trigger for him. It's a positive trigger for me. But he bought some gummy bears, and that actually brought him down. And by the time he came back and had a few gummy bears, he said, I'm ready to go to the hospital and see a doctor. And we did not use any force at all. The officers were kind of taken back. Wow, this stuff works. And so it was good. It was a great example of what we do and how easy it can be if you tell an officer, hey, give him some space, and especially a supervisor, even an FTO, sergeant, lieutenant, give him some space, give him an alternate way to handle and manage somebody that may be in a state of crisis or psychosis, and it works. And so those officers became immediate ambassadors for CIT, no doubt about it.
Okay. Okay. Well, now you said that obviously this kind of goes against the grain to some extent about what you, I guess, learned in the police academy.
Right.
But you found in this case it was very beneficial and helpful to the way the situation resolved itself.
Yes, and that was just one of many that I've had a chance to see. Because I'm a crisis negotiator, we deal with people in crisis all the time, and we're trained and we're brought in really to see if we can de-escalate through nonviolent, non-use of force, through phone calls, through listening, active listening skills. So yeah, it's just one example of many that I've seen personally. And the more the officers see it on the road, it works, the more they'll buy in.
And so if you have officers out there, whether it's in the municipality or the county, and they say, yeah, this program sounds really touchy-feely, it's a lot of drama, role play, I don't really want to hear all that mess. What do you say to them? Since you're a fellow officer, you've got the badge.
Yeah, well, I can tell you that not every officer is going to embrace it. Okay, not every officer is going to have the capability or the set of just natural God-given talents to be a negotiator or to implement crisis intervention techniques. It's just not everyone's. It's not made for everybody, and I think Lieutenant Westerberg can tell you that. It takes a certain type of officer who's interested in it, and I don't think you can force a SWAT team to go into CIT and get a buy-in from a SWAT team. They have a different set of skills. A crisis negotiation team, FTOs that are training young officers, our training staff, they should go through it, and it should be part of something that we are teaching and constantly talking about and updating throughout their basic training and through annual training. I'm a big believer in it.
Now, my understanding is that that with CIT, there's a very deliberate reason it's not taught in the academy, along with everything else. You want officers who've actually been out in the working world, so to speak, the real life experience of being an officer.
Absolutely.
Why is that?
Absolutely. Mental health is discussed in the academy, but if you look at the academy, the whole point of the academy is basic law enforcement. It's a basic law enforcement class, 408 hours, and it's basic law enforcement. And it really, if you extend a week and have that officer recruit, stay for another week, and you talk about this, yes, they're going to learn something from it, but it really takes an individual being out there, whether it's in a jail or an environment or whether it's working the road, to really understand and embrace it, because they're out there seeing this. And if you get somebody that is just been through mandate, they've just graduated, and yet now they're having to tack on another week, or it's another week expanded on, they're going to learn something, but they're not going to take away something from it that they would if they've had a little bit of experience under their belt, because they can kind of see it and understand it. Oh, I remember when I dealt with an individual that was having the same signs and symptoms that we're sitting here and discussing. Or, oh, I remember in the jail when this occurred, and this is what we did to de-escalate. And we didn't have to tase them, or we didn't have to utilize pepper spray. So it really, it's just basic law enforcement training with the academies. And I think it really needs to be later down the road when they do have that experience, so they'll have a better understanding of it and they can embrace it. Because like Lieutenant McCree was saying, it's not, not everybody that attends a class is wanting to be there. I've seen a lot of, with the agencies trying to go to 100%, they've been voluntold. And so being voluntold, they're like, yeah, okay, whatever, I'm away from work for 40 hours or whatever. And I tell them on the first day, my goal is to just give you one more resource. You're already out there de-escalating. We're just tweaking it a little bit. And so my goal is by the end of the week for them to take away something that's going to help them. And every single class that I've had, we finish on Friday, and the following week I'm getting a call, or even through the weekend, an email, a text. You're not going to believe this, but this is just what happened, and it works.
And so some of those people you refer to that are voluntold by their departments, they come away saying, gosh, I think it's actually a good class after all.
It is. And it really kind of turns their thought process 180 degrees. I've actually had an officer that he told me from day one, I'm not buying into this. And I was told to be here. Okay, I appreciate your honesty. And by Friday, he was like, okay, I have a better understanding of it. but I'm not buying into this still. And that weekend, he called me on the phone and he said, okay, I'm with you. He said, I just had a situation. I utilized the techniques that were taught in class and that we learned, and it works. But again, if it's, it's not going to work 100% of the time. But more often than not, and that's the whole point of the CIT, is to educate the officers to recognize the signs and symptoms and to take that extra moment and spend a little more time with them to de-escalate. But I will tell you, the first key behind all of it is officer safety. And I'm a big advocate in saying that if an officer is in the middle of a situation and they encounter an individual that has a weapon, forget the CIT skills. You're a law enforcement officer. Forget the CIT skills, because safety is paramount for the officer as well as the family members as well as that individual. And so if we just take a little bit more time, like Lieutenant McCreary was saying, we just step back and allow that officer to do it, just take a little bit more time, we may be successful. And that person may not have to go to jail. That person may not be injured, and the officer will not be injured.
I think you also made a point a minute ago about either the state or the governor kind of issuing an order regarding officers taking this training. Does that mean that because of the governor's order now, Cobb County all of its officers must go through the training, or just how does that affect?
The training that has been issued by Governor Deal was the training on de-escalation techniques as well as community policing, and there's a couple other classes in that you can choose from. But those classes are paramount, as well as the use of force and de-escalation combined together. As far as the CIT, they're getting their hands involved is basically through post and having actual representatives that are post instructors, not post, but through Georgia GIPSTIC, which is the Georgia Peace Officer Standards and Training, getting them involved and going through the academy and having them basically go out through the state of Georgia and hitting the counties where they may not, as I said earlier, may not have that representative or the person to be able to teach CIT, or they can't send their person 20, 30, 40, 50, even 100 miles away to attend a class. So it's really working, the governor working with GIPSTIC and setting up the training to have that accessibility out more in the state of Georgia, in the rural areas especially.
Okay. And so the training you get for CIT, is it kind of a one and done? Like, I took the class once and I'm trained for forever and ever? Or is there a continuing education requirement that, hey, I got this training in 2015, but in 2020 I've got to get an hour, and in 2025 I've got to get 10 hours, and does it work like that?
It is a one and done. Once you've certified and you've been through the training, you are a CIT officer. And but as I stated earlier, you're utilizing these, you're de-escalating every time. A lot of these officers, when they go out on calls, they're de-escalating, 90% of the time. And so with CIT, it's just another resource, another tool that they can have in their toolbox to utilize, especially now that they've been educated on being able to recognize the signs and symptoms of mental illness.
And I think you mentioned, Lieutenant, about the fact that you work with people in crisis. I would imagine that would also include domestic disturbances, I would assume.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And so how does your training as a CIT person help with those particular situations?
Well, anytime you're dealing with somebody who is in a state of crisis, like Lieutenant Westberger said, officer safety comes first, which she did a tremendous job. That was a huge buy-in for officers, talking about officer safety day one, and they do in CIT, because domestic violence situations are extremely volatile. Dealing with people is a skill. It's a skill set. And so every time you do a traffic stop, every time you go to a domestic dispute, you're learning how to deal with people. CIT just provided you additional set of tools to deal with different kinds of people. We talked about, again, negative and positive triggers. What may work for one person may not work for somebody else. So it just gives you more tools in your toolbox to try to de-escalate situations through using the techniques taught in CIT. So it was very valuable. And as someone who's a lieutenant and a shift commander, I bring mental health training to our roll call, on a yearly basis, and talk to the young officers, not to diagnose, but to recognize signs and symptoms of any type of mental illness, and then to address it properly. And that's something that the mobile crisis has been a tremendous asset to law enforcement where we didn't have before. We didn't know what to do with someone who's in a state of crisis, and we believe that there's a mental illness aspect to it. Now we can have a phone number to call that has a social worker that can respond, usually within about 30 minutes, to assist us, again, not with diagnosing, but maybe recognizing symptoms and the resources that help not only the person, but the family as well. So it's a tremendous help in all contacts we have.
Okay, and just so people understand too, if you get a call about someone who is believed to have a mental illness, and that call is being responded to, who's coming to that call? Is it the sheriff's office who's coming, or is it the Cobb County Police Department?
The Cobb County Police Department responds to 911 calls. And some departments have a CIT actual team that can respond to mental health. If you know it's a mental health issue, we do not. We have limited resources as far as the amount of officers, and I don't have the numbers of how many officers have been through CIT training. I know it's increasing by the year, but yeah, so we will respond to that. And if I hear something stating that there's a mental health aspect to it, or there's possibly a mental health aspect to it, I will respond as well.
Okay, so playing this out, so assume you come into a situation, person has a mental illness, they've been detained safely and without incident, no one's been injured in the process. How is that person's arrest and detention handled differently than someone without a mental health diagnosis? Could you walk us through that process?
Sure. If there's a crime been committed and the offender is the person with mental illness, we have to make a determination what is best for them. Is it a situation where they need to go to the hospital and have it's called a 1013, an involuntary evaluation done? Or do we just go ahead and make the charge and send them to jail and have them go through the court, mental health court, whatever they may be designated as? So it's kind of a judgment call. If you get to the scene and maybe there's a history of mental health, maybe somebody is there that can vouch that there's a mental health issue. Maybe you can see, a lot of the mental health issues we have, there's a lot of grandiose language with it. I am God, and I am, the Savior, so when you have that kind of aspect, you're like, okay, well, this is someone who has mental health issues. Then generally we will make arrangements to transport to the hospital, either in a police car or ambulance to the hospital. An officer will go to the hospital with the individual. They have to wait for a doctor to evaluate the arrestee or the offender. And if a 1013 is signed by a doctor, then that person is turned over to the hospital and their security at that time. If the person is evaluated and the doctor does not sign a 1013, we go through the normal procedures of getting a release from the hospital, and they'll be taken to the Cobb County Adult Detention Facility.
Okay, that's one on County Services Parkway?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, Ms. Thompson, as a mother of a person who has a mental health diagnosis, do you normally have trepidations about if your loved one has an episode or an incident? Do you have trepidations about bringing in, law enforcement to the situation, or no? Or what is your typical response as a parent?
I didn't have a personal experience, but I do. Excuse me. I've been in family support groups where families are very. I do have trepidation, I guess, about calling in police officers because they're afraid that it's going to escalate the situation, and they try to handle it on their own, and then sometimes it gets out of hand. They need that outside support, so having a CIT trained officer makes a huge difference. And that's one of the things that we talk about in NAMI is it's okay, to bring in, additional support when you've got a crisis in your home. And it's okay when you call 911 to ask for someone with CIT training and to get that kind of support.
So as a parent, having someone like Lieutenant McCrary would make you feel more comfortable calling the police to help your loved one.
Absolutely. And one of the things as we were talking, hearing about negotiation a while ago is, it's from the officer side, it looks like one thing, but from the person with the illness, it looks entirely different. They don't see themselves as being sick. They have no insight to their illness at certain points. Now, when they get on medication, they gain more insight. But in a crisis situation, they may have no clue that they have a mental illness, and they're like, I'm not sick. I don't need medication. I don't need to go to the hospital. Why are you bothering me?
So they're kind of in denial.
Absolutely.
Okay. But you can help as a family member. You can help give the officers context of what they're
Yes,
dealing with here.
the bigger picture of what's been going on. Yeah, I do a lot of that. I do track my son's history over, the last 5 years, the different medications he's been on, the ups and downs he's been through, and that's very helpful to both a correction officer and a medical provider to know what the history is.
And why don't you, I guess, sort of share your perspective as a parent of someone who has a mental health diagnosis? Do you find is it a very isolating experience? Do you find that you have a lot of people you can turn to and confide in and say, oh, we all have together, I mean,
Well, that's what the family support group is for in NAMI, and we sit in the circles of those family support groups and say, no one else would understand what we're talking about right now. And yet it's very difficult for people who've not experienced it to understand. So yes, I do, I use a little bit of caution about the details that I share with certain people who might not have an awareness of what the mental illness is like. Other people, if they've had some experience, even if it's not in their own family, might have a little more understanding.
and in your particular case, your loved one didn't experience an issue with mental illness or didn't manifest until college age.
Exactly.
So
And
what was he
that's very
like?
typical.
So what was he like in high school and in grade school? Was he a smart kid or?
He was gifted. He was a musician. He was an artist. He was very independent, had traveled a lot. And so we had no clue about mental illness. And because of the stigma in the family, even though there was family history of mental illness, we were not told what the family history was. And so had we known, we might have been able to look for the symptoms a little sooner. And as it turned out, that he was actually incarcerated 6 months before we had any idea that there was a family history of mental illness.
So if you have a viewer who's watching going, what kind of silly parent is that? How do you not know your child has a mental illness? What would you say to that person?
You just haven't got a clue until it shows up in your home, at someone's 18, 19, even, later in life, it just because they had very good years, from 0 to 18 doesn't mean that, the mental health is going to stay stable for the rest of their lives.
Right. And some people might think, well, a person with mental illness is not very bright. They're not very intelligent. They're
Oh,
probably
no.
probably very slow.
No. As a matter of fact, sometimes the people with mental illness disorders are some of the more bright students in classrooms, and so I mean, you can't make that judgment across the board, but it usually is not. Intelligence is not a determination for mental illness.
Okay. And what number of kids are thought to have schizophrenia diagnosed in the United States?
Well, what I found out is about 1 out of every 100 people globally will be affected with schizophrenia symptoms. And if you think about that in terms of a school population or, for example, a college campus, that's huge. College campuses might have, anywhere from 5 to 30,000 students. And look at the numbers. If you look at just 1%, that's a lot of people who are just beginning to experience the symptoms of a mental disorder at age 18, 19, when they're just going off to college. And I do believe that those changes in lifestyle probably trigger a lot of the symptoms of the disorder.
Now, some people might say, well, my kid's 18, my kid's 21. I'm done. They're adults now, and I'm done with any more medical treatment of them, done with all that kind of those life things. Just they're on their own now.
Mm-hmm.
How do you respond as a parent of a person with a mental health diagnosis?
I can't do that. I feel like I will be involved in my son's recovery for the rest of my life. And just knowing that he has, it's not like, tough love, you've got to send them out and, teach them to, do it on their own. There are many things that a person with a mental disorder just cannot do without support. And family support is very critical, I believe.
And so that long-term planning process has got to be a stressful thing for parents.
Yes, and we hear that a lot in our family support groups, that families are going, gosh, I thought, at this point in my life, I would be seeing my children, go off and get married and having other children. I'd be traveling the world, and this is not the life that I had chosen. But that's the case with many illnesses. It's not just mental illness. I mean, people can be disabled in many ways.
And then you mentioned the support groups for family members. What else does NAMI do for its members?
A lot of education. So, we've heard a lot about the CIT, but the family to family training, in our voices, teaching people to learn to, tell their stories, the advocacy training, NAMI Smarts. Oh gosh, what am I missing? If you'll go on our website, NAMI.org, you can find a whole lot of legislative, information. And the programs are so well designed, so well researched, and so well facilitated that I think people, anyone that is being faced with a mental health crisis, or a family member or a loved one with a mental health crisis should definitely look at NAMI.org and get involved with the organization.
Okay. All right. And I do want to also pick up with the Colonel about your experience with people once they've been arrested and brought into the jails, the jail, I guess the jail system or conviction center. How do you, can you tell the audience how you handle it once they come into your protective custody?
Well, when they're brought into custody, and just like he said, the decision is made to take them to jail if they've been released by the hospital, we are fortunate to have a mental health staff working on site. We have a psychiatrist, a psychologist, we have social workers. So they're able to go in and stabilize that individual either through medication or counseling, some form of treatment, so that we can then manage them effectively. They are a huge help. Without them, we would be lost, basically.
Yeah. And I want to kind of address that too. My son was in the jail system for 11 months with untreated psychosis. There's a term called duration of untreated psychosis. And having that kind of mental health staff to move it along more quickly, to get recovery as quickly as possible. The longer a person with newly developed mental illness goes without treatment, the less likelihood of the recovery, long-term recovery. So reducing that duration of untreated psychosis is very important.
And your loved one did not go through the Cobb County system?
No.
Different,
No.
different jurisdiction?
Different jurisdiction, yes. No. No experience here, but it was a very, very long. And one thing that happens a lot in law enforcement, and maybe you can address that, is that people will say, oh, well, they're just malingering. I had no idea what the word malingering meant until I was introduced to it. Well, your son's just malingering. He doesn't really have a mental illness. He never had an illness before. It's only he's trying to get out of the sentence. And so malingering meaning that he was faking the symptoms, and of course he was not.
Right. Now, do the people that you see, do you know when they come in that they have a mental health diagnosis, or do you have inmates that come in and all of a sudden once they're in your custody, oh my gosh, this person has a mental health diagnosis?
We typically know when they come in just based on the symptoms that's demonstrated. But one of the things that we deal with quite often, first we require our staff to go through the CIT training because they're exposed to those with mental health more so than anybody. They see it every single day. They're working among them 24/7. So they have to go through the training. But one of the issues or challenges that we have, and we try to get the courts involved with expediting their cases, is that we can't place these individuals into general population. So a lot of them are segregated within the facility based on their mental health issues. And we can't take the risk because we're there to protect everybody, all inmates in custody. So to have that person segregated, or what we call lockdown, segregated in a cell by themselves, the longer, as she stated, the longer they stay segregated, the worse it is. But luckily, if we did not have that mental health staff there available for that counseling, for that treatment, I think it would have very negative effects on anyone that's incarcerated for a long period of time with mental illness.
Was the jail built or designed with the idea in mind you'd have a separate pod for people with mental illness?
We do. We have a separate area that is designated for those with mental health issues.
And picking up the point that Mr. Percy made a minute ago, obviously some mental health diagnoses might be fairly mild, some might be very severe. So if you're trying to create an environment where your population is housed in the same facility, how do you manage those two types of relationships?
Well, we do have those inmates that are just under the care of mental health, just counseling, that can be placed in general population, but those with a more severe illness, they are assigned to that area.
Okay. And what is the capacity for that particular pod or area for persons with a mental health diagnosis?
In that particular pod, it houses up to 192 individuals. Currently, actually, I think I brought the stats with me.
You did homework.
I did my homework. In that particular pod, we have just 77 individuals. And those are the ones with, again, more severe illness than someone that we can place or feel safer to place in general population who hasn't acted out or displayed any type of violence.
Now, I thought I heard Chief Deputy Beck say earlier that 30% of your inmates have a mental health diagnosis?
Yes, that's true. I got the numbers from our psychiatrist, and what he provided to us was 36% of our inmates are prescribed some type of psychiatric medications. More than 700 inmates are currently under the care of mental health. And right now, we're talking about a population of a little over 2,000. So that's about 45% of our population that's under the care of, in some form or fashion, dealing with mental health.
So I guess if you help us, let's say you have a person come into your detention facility who you have a parent like Ms. Thompson who knows the diagnosis, she knows the medications he's been taking. Does the jail automatically fill all those same prescriptions and keep him on that same medication? Or do you say, no, we're going to have our own people look at him and we'll decide what he's going to be taking from here on out?
What happens is our mental health staff will reach out to families to get that history. A lot of the medications that they're taking on the outside are prescribed and can be taken inside. I don't know the medications, I'm not real familiar with them, but if they are not actually given that particular medicine, they'll give them a generic form or something close to it. So they don't take them off medications when they're on it. They make sure that they're still stabilized through medication. What those medications are, I can't say.
And they can be treated on site and evaluated on site without having to go outside to a hospital.
Absolutely.
Okay.
You
have that capacity.
A lot of the services are provided right in-house because of the level of providers that we have.
Okay. And what remedies, I guess, or what tools do you have in your tool belt, so to speak, if you have a person who has a severe diagnosis of mental illness and they act out in some way in their own pod? What tools do you have in your tool belt that you can use to help deal with that situation once you've brought things under control? Now what do you do?
Now we call upon mental health, and they will give us directions on how they feel the best way to interact with that individual. So their assistance is critical in how we manage that inmate. We can't, we don't leave it to our own device and say, well, we think this may work to calm him down. We refer to mental health. They have the background on them, the history on them, how they've been treated in the past. So they tell us exactly what it is we need to do.
And are those mental health staff, are they actual employees of the Cobb County Sheriff's Department?
We partner with CSB,
Okay.
but they work on site inside the facility.
And that's where they are all the time?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have, I guess, support groups that you offer for inmates while they're there? I mean, to help as part of their overall care?
Just the counseling that's provided by our mental health staff.
Okay.
They do discharge planning, so they do connect them with groups like NAMI when they're released from custody if they don't have a support group outside already. So again, we leave that delivery of services to them.
And I think Chief Deputy Beck said that 60 days is the longest that you'll have a resident who's got a felony. Is that correct?
The average stay for someone arrested on a felony offense is 60 days. We've had them housed there for years. Not that many of them, but they will stay as they maneuver their way through the court system. Someone that's charged with a misdemeanor offense, the average stay is 6 days. So it's a revolving door. We're always getting someone in, we book in probably 50 to 60 individuals each day. So we're without a doubt, it's inevitable that we will face someone with mental health weekly.
Yes.
She mentioned CSB. CSB not only has people within the jail, but they have resources outside of the jail too.
Right.
And the mental health court, they're our main treatment provider. And so and they provide treatment not only for people in mental health court, so people can be released from the jail and very often are and receive treatment there at the CSB, not at the jail, but at the standalone CSB.
Okay. Well, and actually, you bring up a good point too about the accountability court, the mental health court. Is this a creation of the state system, or is this a Cobb County ordinance that was created by a board of commissioners?
Many years ago now, accountability courts were very new. Governor Deal has put an emphasis on accountability courts throughout the state. Cobb County has had a drug treatment court for over 10 years. I think 12 to 14 years. But the mental health court and the veterans court are fairly new creations, but there's an enabling statute that allows us to have that. So it's not a creation of Cobb County, it's a creation of the state of Georgia. Not every county by any stretch has a mental health court, but the state is trying to put incentives in place for people, for other court systems within the state to have mental health courts.
And with the mental health courts, can the judge order someone to go through the mental health court system and say that's part of your sentence, you must go through it? Or is it a voluntary program?
It is usually, and by usually I mean 99% of the time, it is a voluntary thing. The defense attorney with their client decides they want to apply for mental health court. There's an application process. The district attorney's office, Vic Reynolds, my boss, the district attorney, our office is kind of the gatekeeper, and we can decide whether or not a person should get into a mental health court or any of our accountability courts, or whether they should not get into one of our accountability courts. There is an area in the law where a judge can sentence someone to that, but that's kind of a dangerous area because judges don't necessarily know what kind of mental illness or what kind of mental treatment these people may need. So it very rarely happens. So usually it's a voluntary situation on the part of the defendant. Now, having said that, they're not out of the jail voluntarily. I mean, they've done something to get themselves into some trouble. And so it's voluntary in that they apply for mental health court.
And so you mentioned that there's a gatekeeper function. Who's conducting the gatekeeping? Is the actual assistant district attorneys? Are they going before
That's
a panel
me.
of psychiatrists?
Well, I'm the sole prosecutor that does accountability courts in the district attorney's office, and so I get it. But I'm not a specialist. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a treatment provider. So I don't have, or I don't claim to have any expertise in mental health issues. So I look at it from a legal perspective. Is this a case that legally is sufficient that we could put this into one of our accountability courts? And then I send it over to our mental health court team, which is composed of myself, a defense attorney, a judge, and then a sheriff's deputy, a probation officer, and some treatment providers from the CSB. And so they go, the people from the CSB go to the jail usually. Occasionally the person's out on bond, but normally they're in custody. And they talk to them. And we get their records. We get release of information from them so that we can get their records from other doctors. We find out what medications they're on. And I say we, it's the care provider. And then they talk to them, and then we come together as a staff, and we meet every Thursday morning at 8 o'clock a.m. and staff those cases that are ready to be staffed and determine, is this a person that has, the words that we use are a severe and persistent mental illness that is affecting their daily life. And it's somebody that we think that we can help. There's certain people that we may not, in our setting, we may not have the capabilities of treating. But if it's somebody that we feel like has that severe and persistent mental illness that's affecting their daily life and that we can treat, we very often, we do our best to put them into those programs. And sometimes they're drug offenses, sometimes they're theft, nonviolent offenses, but occasionally, and sometimes, we do take violent offenses in mental health court and in Veterans Accountability and Treatment Court.
Well, that was, I guess, my next question. Sort of is from the perspective of the criminal part of it. Is there a delineation made? Okay, well, only misdemeanors can be doing this. Only nonviolent misdemeanors. Only nonviolent felonies. What's the drawing line there, or is there one?
Well, there's a bright line between what we call 7 deadlies. So murder, rape, armed robbery, any kind of sexual offense. Those cases are just not going to get into any of our accountability courts. However, some people, and all of these folks that are on this panel can tell you, some people that have mental illness, because of their mental illness, will commit violent offenses. And so we do take certain violent offenses. Now that's where the subjective part of my job comes in, because I have to kind of do a risk analysis on who we feel like we can take and help and who we feel like we can't. I have to be careful with that, though, because I'm not a care provider, and I don't, sometimes I might look at somebody and go, well, this guy is just a criminal. But when I send it over, they start digging and they find out the history of mental illness, and when this person is on their medication and when they're in treatment, they're fine. And so sometimes we take some of those kind of folks.
And so when they're in the once they've been granted, I guess, permission, I guess for lack of a better phrase,
Sure.
to be in the system, to go through mental health court, are they actually in? Are they sitting there in the Cobb County Detention Center that whole time?
No.
Are they releasing their own recognizance and then had to go through and check in?
You can get in various ways. Some people, if they don't have a criminal history, they can do what's called a pre-adjudication case, in which instance, if they successfully complete the mental health court program, the case gets dismissed. Very often, by the time they get to us, they have some criminal history, and so in that case, some of them are in on probation, end up on probation, and so they're on probation and they're in mental health court at the same time. But everybody that we have in mental health court that's an active participant is out of the Cobb County Adult Detention Center, because we have them doing a lot of work almost every day.
And so are they the kinds of things they'd be doing were, like, I guess, taking their medication, going to psychological counseling on a regular basis?
Our program is set up in phases. In the first phase and the second phase, which is approximately the first 8 months that they're in, they're doing 8 group treatment sessions per week. They do at least three drug tests per week. They do independent counseling as needed. They meet with their case manager weekly. They have to work, if they don't have a GED and they're capable of getting a GED, they have to be working on their GED if they don't have a high school or a higher education. So we keep them really busy, and that's a part of all of our accountability courts is the structure. A lot of the people that I see in all of these courts lack a certain amount of structure. Not all of them, but a lot of them do lack a certain amount of structure. And so it's true what they say about idle hands being the devil's workshop sometimes. And sometimes one of the biggest things that we do is keep them busy. And 8 treatment groups per week is a lot to do, because if they can work, they have to work, or else they're doing community service. So they're kept very busy.
Well, some of those activities that you've talked about obviously have cost, I would assume, like having a drug test performed, going to these counseling sessions. Mm-hmm. Those things have to be, they're not paying for themselves. So how do you handle that part of it? Who's paying for that? How's that provided?
We have some money that's from the state. we have some money that is grant money, and the participants pay a certain amount, and it varies in the different accountability courts. At least they have a little bit. We have found, it's been our experience, that even paying a nominal amount is a buy-in for these people, even if it's just the cheapest one. Actually, is our mental health court. Our participants have to pay $10 per week towards a mental health court, and that just helps them to have a little bit of a buy-in on the treatment plan itself.
And now, of course, I've read in the newspaper where there's occasionally graduation ceremonies for people in the mental health court. What do you have to do to be eligible for graduation? What is that like?
Well, you get through the whole program, and so, as I said, it's a minimum of 18 months. They have to get through all of the phases. We understand in all of our accountability courts that there's going to be setbacks. People with mental health court, people with drug addictions, they all have setbacks, and we understand that. And so if you have a positive drug screen, it's not like we're kicking somebody out. We sanction them. Sometimes we send them to Colonel Prince for a few days or that sort of thing. Sometimes it's community service, but they have to go through all of the phases, successfully complete all of the phases, and then we have graduation ceremonies. In mental health court, I think we're having 3 or 4 per year now. In Veterans Court, and I mentioned Veterans Court because we're here to talk about mental health court. Mental health, excuse me. And we have a lot of our veterans who are coming back from combat situations who have PTSD, and a lot of times that also leads them to some substance abuse issues. So, so in Veterans Court, we have graduations 3 or 4 times a year as well, and it's kind of like a graduation ceremony. We give them certificates. We have had senators speak. We've had a lot of dignitaries speak at these graduations, and we've had our Cobb Commission chairman speak to recognize the hard work that these people have put in, because they work hard, and hopefully to give them the incentive to continue to live the lives that we all want them to lead.
And so from your experience in dealing with this program, what separates the successful graduates from the folks who perhaps have to go back and pay Colonel Prince a visit on a more long-term basis? Are there certain attributes, like they have a family involved, or is there certain things that you can see that this is a trend line?
It's hard to say that in mental health, especially in the mental health court setting, because we have some people who their symptoms are fairly mild, and we have others who have some very, very severe mental illness issues. And so it's certainly, of course, always helps if they have a supportive family, but it's hard to say that there's any one thing that really stands out to what makes a successful person in mental health court.
Well, Ms. Thompson, did your loved one have an experience with the mental health court system?
No, he didn't qualify for a mental health court. One of the things that I think is important that just recently came up is having access to the right medications while you're on that program, making sure that the medications are stable. And one of the things that we just heard about in NAMI was the possibility of losing the injectable medications that are a little more regular, because a person might only take an injection twice a month, once or twice a month, whereas daily pills may be more difficult to manage. So simple things like, helping people with the right medications and supportive, making sure that they're able to manage it on the right dosages. It takes a lot to get that. It's not something that you just go in and write a prescription and it's done. It takes a lot of figuring.
Okay. Well, I think we're getting to that point in the evening where we're probably going to have to bring it to a close, and I hate to do so because I think we could go on quite a bit longer, quite frankly, given the nature of the topic we're covering. One thing I'd like to do, just for our audience benefit, if each one of you could just take 1 minute only, and then we'll just kind of go across our Lieutenant Westenberger and go to Lieutenant McCreary, and just say in that 1 minute, sort of like something a positive takeaway about this topic that you want people in the audience to understand, or something that you want them to take away from and learn from this experience that maybe changes their perception about mental illness and how to deal with mental illness in your respective walks and how you deal with it in your own jobs and your daily walks.
I think overall, as far as the general public, the one positive thing to take away is that to do your best to try to educate yourself on the signs and symptoms. We've heard all night that in one form or fashion, we are going to come across and we're going to cross paths with an individual that has a mental illness. And whether we're sitting next to them in church or whether we're sitting next to them in a cubicle or we cross them in the aisle in a grocery store. And so just taking that time to educate yourself and not being so quick to judge an individual who has a mental illness and not throwing up the stigma. Maybe taking some time to say, okay, that's my neighbor, and there is an episode going on or there's a crisis going on, and what can I do to help? It may be just for that time being to, go and watch their kids while they're in the middle of that crisis until law enforcement can respond to point them in the right direction. And NAMI, really the website NAMI.org, NAMI Georgia, NAMI Cobb, there's a lot of resources that Cobb County especially has to offer individuals, and not only the individual, the consumer, but the family, and just being able to have somebody that they can reach out and have that support system in place. And you can recover from a mental illness. People do recover, and so they have setbacks, but they can recover. And so that's the good point of it, is that the unfortunate disease that is out there, people can recover from. And the great thing about it is the fact that, and I say this again, Cobb is so blessed to have so many resources put in place, whether it's at the detention center or whether it's, right across the street from the detention center, or if it's right here downtown Marietta at, coming to the NAMI meetings. So we're very fortunate in Cobb to have that.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Ms. Thompson?
Well, that's a hard act to follow, but I will add that don't be afraid if you or someone has a mental illness, don't be afraid to reach out and get support. I think it's the people who live in isolation that have the most trouble with mental health issues. And then being able to see we have 12 principles of support in NAMI. I won't go through all of them, but we see the person first, before the illness, and have compassion for people, just as we would have compassion for someone with any other disease or disorder. So, wrapping everything with compassion, and then, being able to not be living in fear and knowing that you're not alone is real important.
Great. Thank you so much. Colonel Prince?
The one thing I'd like to add is I appreciate this forum, first of all, but just when we talk about the stigma of mental health, the public has a perception of what occurs in a jail. And for us to be able to tell you that your loved ones are cared for and that we have the expert staffing on site available to assist them throughout their incarceration is very important. We're very transparent. We talk to families every single day and put them at ease to let them know that no one's thrown away the key and forgot about them, that they are being taken care of.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. Mr. Pursley?
I think since I've been doing the job of an accountability court prosecutor and people find out that I deal with mental health courts, more and more people say to me, my brother has schizophrenia, or my child has this, and it's just kind of it's just kind of hit me that we all know and have loved ones who have mental illnesses. You may not know that. You may not know that they do, but they do. We all have them, every single person in this room. And if we realize that, I think that just kind of helps us to open up and be more and listen and be more open to the things that we can do to help these folks.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Lieutenant McCreary?
The takeaway is things like autism and schizophrenia, bipolar borderline personality disorders are scary words. They're scary things that officers deal with all the time and families that deal with all the time if they're not educated. And as we educate officers better, the public better, those words become less and less scary because what you see and what we learn is you can live a very successful life and positive life with mental illness if it's treated, if it's monitored, if it's medicated. And that's something we just gonna have to continue to grind at until those words aren't scary anymore. And they don't have to be.
Okay, well, wonderful. Well, thank you again to each one of our panelists. I mean, we're very blessed in Cobb to have such dedicated servants and tireless advocates like Ms. Thompson. I think it's phenomenal, and I appreciate our audience members who are here with us tonight, as well as those folks who are on Cobb TV and watching online. I think you have learned a lot of very valuable information thanks to each and every one of you tonight. So we thank you for your time. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Trish.
Thank you. Thank you for attending and watching on Cobb TV this evening. We thank you and we are honored to have each of you as our panel members this evening. Our community is very fortunate to have each of you educating the community concerning mental health issues. We can commend you for your daily dedication to protect, support, provide care, services, assist with legal issues, and programs for individuals with mental health issues and their family members who are experiencing how to assist and support those individuals daily. You are appreciated, and we thank you for your daily service to help the community understand mental health issues. A special thank you to Brad and for Dave for broadcasting tonight's discussion on Cobb TV. Thank you for joining us this evening. We invite you to watch all of our 2013 through 2017 panel discussions on Cobb TV website or link from the Neighborhood Safety Commission website. Please join us in September when we will resume our monthly panel discussions. We wish each of you an enjoyable, relaxing, and safe summer. Thank you. Good night.